All right, welcome everyone. Holding by Book of Leviticus Chapter 15. Again, want to welcome everyone. Holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 15. We're in verse 12. And again, talking about purity and impurity when it comes to discharges, as we've been speaking about, and we spoke last week or a few weeks back, I guess, about the mikvah, going to the mikvah and things that are, let's say, an impediment, something that's maybe a barrier between the person and the body, right? Sorry, maybe there's something in the body that's an impediment between the person and the water, and therefore will still be impure. Doesn't matter, doesn't matter if they go to the mikveh or not, right? It's kind of like, I guess, the way it's brought down is it's like a person's in the mikveh, but he's got a dead, rodent in his hand. So it doesn't matter how many times you dunk in there. The fact that you touched it, you're impure, right? We spoke about the mikveh. We spoke about impediments. Spoke about tattoos, right? Spoke about a lot of different things. So here the Torah continues. Again, Book of Leviticus Chapter 15, verse 12. It says, so here it says, now we're talking about a zav, talking about somebody, that has this discharge, whether a man or a woman. And it says over here, kli cheres. Kli cheres is like pottery, right? Pottery that a zav will touch, right? Not everything that zav touches necessarily becomes impure. It depends on what. Depends on part of it, the whole thing, whatever it is. But usually, when a zav is going to touch something, the temple existed. Let's say the temple in Jerusalem existed, then we say that whatever a zav touch becomes impure. Right now, the question is, does that thing ever become pure? So by certain things, you put them in the mikveh, that's fine, right? Clothing, you can kosher. Certain things, let's say something made out of metal, you can kosher. Something that's wooden, the problem. Something made out of pottery, also a problem, right? As we see now, something made out of pottery, let's say today, like China, like fine china. So someone ate treif on fine china. Impossible to make usable again, to make kosher again. Why? Because you can't kosher fine china. Now there is an opinion that holds that since you can't kosher, what do? You can leave it for 12 months. In other words, not going to touch anything for 12 months, put it in storage, right? Pack it away. And in 12 months, I could use it afterwards. So it doesn't go through any cleansing process. Right? There is such an opinion. There's a leniency. Let's say you didn't have enough. Let's say this is what you want to use for Passover or something like that. Could be a leniency for that. Let it stay for a year. But what does the Torah tell me in general? Torah here says pottery that the zav will touch shall be broken. No hope. What do you do with it? You break it. No way to kosher. And any wooden utensil shall be rinsed in water. Now, pottery in general, what's going to happen? You break it. There's no hope. Take it into the mikveh, dunk it 100 times, 1,000 times. Not going to help, right? What's going to help over here? You're going to break it. But anything wooden shall be rinsed in water. Now, interesting enough, we hold today, wood cannot be kosher also. Wood is also problematic. In other words, if I had a knife and the knife is metal and the handle is wood, now some may say, to double check this, but I think some will say if it gets messed up, I kosher it the same way it was used, right? Either I put it over fire or I put it in hot boiling water, right? Usually probably hot boiling water. But now what do I do with the wood? What do I do with, if I can take the metal out, I can unscrew the wood, okay? Right? Maybe it's not going to be an issue. It's just the metal. But if you hold the wood itself, If you hold the wood itself, then what do? Then you're stuck. Either you tell me I can't kosher it at all, or you tell me I kosher like I kosher anything else. So if I kosher anything else, what do? I kosher it the same way. In other words, if I had regular knives, metal knives, they got messed up, they became not kosher. So what do? I wash it off, I clean it, I wait 24 hours. Let's say I wait 24 hours, boiling water in a pot, put it in the boiling water, no problem. I can kosher. So if we say wood, there's nothing else to do, I have to kosher it the same way, then that opinion will say not a problem. In other words, I kosher the metal, the wood comes with it, can't do anything with the wood, can't unscrew it, let's say, because a lot of these knives can't unscrew it, right? So let's say you can't unscrew it. So one opinion is, I kosher it the same way. And if I kosher it the same way, not an issue. But if we hold wood cannot be kosher, and therefore, I'm stuck over here. The metal I might be able to kosher, the wood I can't. I can't take the wood off. I mean, it doesn't make sense anyway. Right? If I take the wood off, how am I going to use the knife? Right? So basically, you have to throw the whole thing away. Right? So practical halacha today, if I remember correctly, wood cannot be kosher. There is an opinion that says you kosher it the same way. Right? Kosher it the same way as you would kosher it, however you kosher it. And the wood goes along and it's okay. Right? But I think practically speaking, we don't do it. Right? We don't hold that way. And we hold that wood cannot be kosher. So if a person messed up a wooden utensil, whatever it is, let's say salad utensil, they got messed up. They were used for meat, and now person used it for dairy, and it was piping hot. Right? We'll make it easy. Nothing to do. Hard plastic, no different. Right? If a person, let's say hard plastic serving spoon, they used it to serve hot meats. And then they use it to serve hot cold, right? Hot dairy, right? You can't serve something hot cold. That'd be contradiction in terms, right? If it's hot dairy, that would mess up the spoon. There's no way to kosher. A hard plastic spoon or anything plastic, you don't kosher. Glass, not a problem. According to Sfardim, I could use glass for milk or meat. Why? Because glass does not absorb. Glass 100% doesn't absorb. So if it doesn't absorb, I can use it for meat, wash it off, can be piping hot meat, and then I can use it for dairy. Right? If you're Sephardic, that works. If you're Ashkenazic, doesn't work. Right? Because according to Ashkenazim, it still is. It still is boleh. It's still, absorbs. It's still going to absorb. So if you're Ashkenazic, you use it for meat or milk. You don't use it for both. If it got messed up, I can kosher it. Right? I can definitely kosher it. That metal, I can kosher. Wood, can't kosher. Plastic spoon, whether it's hard plastic, soft plastic, it gets messed up, Right? Nothing to do. Porcelain, right? Fine china also can't kosher. We mentioned, person left it for 12 months. Okay, according to some opinions, you might be able to use it. Right? But fine china, porcelain, let's say a person had, a sink. Let's say a sink's not made out of metal, the inside. It's porcelain. Or what you cut on. The surface that you cut on, is porcelain. Right? Or it's something, I actually had once a, Shayish. What do you call shayish in English? The counters. Counters made out of what they call Evan Kesar. What is Evan Kesar? Evan Kesar is Syrian stone. Right? I guess for lack of a better translation. Some sort of stone. Right? Some sort of stone. That stone cannot be kosher. Now, if that stone can't be kosher, what do you do if you mess it up? Let's say you cut on it hot meat. Right? You didn't use anything in between. You cut on it hot meat, or hot meat fell on it, even better. Right? Let's say you cut it on a meat cutting board, on the meat side. You're cutting away. Your hand slips. The hot meat goes on the counter. Right? So let's say, let's say better. Let's say it was dairy. Let's say it was hot dairy. Now I was cutting cheese or whatever, piping hot, and it fell on my countertop. That's meat. Now, if it's Evan Kesar, or if it's something, let's say it's stone. Let's say it is porcelain over here, right? Let's say it's made out of some sort of porcelain or whatever it is. Can't be kosher. Right now, what would we do anyway? Because we're ultra religious. What would we do to kosher it? We'd pour hot boiling water over it and wash it down. That's what we would do. Right? Certainly for Passover, that's what we do. And then we cover it. We cover it with aluminum foil, heavy aluminum foil. Right? Probably a few things of heavy aluminum foil. Therefore, if anything, it's really piping hot, it's never going to hit the surface anyway. So you're going to say, but how does that help? It's something can't be kosher. You're right. Right? If you have a porcelain sink, right, inside the sink, that's why you got to be very careful. If it's metal, I can kosher it if I make a mistake. If it's porcelain, I can't kosher it. I messed it up. Right? Even if I put boiling hot water on it, I messed it up. I can't go back and kosher it. Right? Okay, I will go through a koshering process, but I better make sure whatever I'm going to wash in there never touches the sides or the bottom of the sink if it's, if it's hot, if I'm using hot water. Why? Because again, it really can't be kosher. Now, interesting enough, we mentioned for Passover, we are ultra religious here. We don't take any chances whatsoever. Even the smallest chance something might have happened, you can't kosher it. It might have hit the aluminum foil, might hit the other aluminum foil, might hit the bottom of your pot. I mean, it's very far-fetched here. Very, very far-fetched. Very much removed. Very much removed over here. If it's very much removed, okay, so I really don't have to worry. So technically speaking, why do I go through all the hassle? Why would I go through the whole hassle to do it again? Because when it comes to Passover, even if you want to tell me if someone's Sephardic and they have dishes that are glass, which is probably the best thing for Jews in training to use, it's either plastic or glass, right? Glass better because according to Ashkenazim, according to Sephardim, it doesn't absorb, right? No, it doesn't absorb. I can use it for milk and meat. According to Ashkenazim, it does absorb, so you can't necessarily use it for milk and meat, but if it gets messed up, then you can kosher it, right? So that would probably be the easiest thing. That would be the easiest thing to use, at least in the process of conversion. Be that as it may, what do you do for Passover? Well, let's say someone's not going to go out and buy a whole new set of dishes, right? Doesn't make sense because you're going to mess them up anyway, as a non-Jew. You'd have to kosher them anyway. So if you buy Corel, in general, Corel is an interesting thing. Corel, by the way, they say Corel never breaks. Right? So that's a lie. I'm going to tell you why it's a lie. Because in Israel, it breaks. Right? You drop it on the floor, it definitely can shatter. Nothing to talk about. Could be other countries as well. I can tell you here, I've had Corel dishes, still have Corel dishes, and they break. If you drop them on the floor, on the countertop, you drop them hard enough, they'll break. Now, what happens if you messed up a Corel dish? In other words, it was meat and you put hot dairy on it, or whatever. You're allowed to kosher it. So that's the difference of opinion among rabbinical authorities. Some say it's got the status of earthenware, right? It's got the status, let's say, of porcelain. Can't kosher it, right? No way to kosher it, right? Unless you wait 12 months or whatever. According to other rabbinical authorities, I'm allowed to kosher it. Why? Because even though it's really considered earthenware, question is, there's a layer of glass. There's a layer of glass on top. Now, if it's a layer of glass on top, what do I say? I say that if it's a layer of glass, it's got the status of glass, right? It does not have the status. It will not have the status of earthenware, right? So look at the last layer. Since the last layer is considered like glass, it's considered glass because that's what it is. So we look at it as being the status of glass, not the status of earthenware. As we mentioned, it is a difference of opinion among among rabbinic scholars today. And I would tell you, Mori Rebbe holds it's okay. He holds it like glass, right? He holds it like glass. You can kosher it. Others would say no. Got the status of earthenware, no different, right? The difference of opinion. Pyrex, just throw these things out there. Pyrex, something that can be kosher. Glass can be kosher, right? Any type of metal, any type of pot, any type of, let's say, corningware, right? That does not have the status of earthenware. It's like metal, you can kosher it. Wood, again, hard plastic cannot be kosher. Earthenware, what we'll call porcelain, cannot be kosher, right? So there are many things, spoons, silverware, cutlery, whatever you want to call them, made out of metal, not a problem, right? I can certainly kosher them. Stoves, ovens, we've spoken about. We're just talking in general about vessels, about different things, whether they can be kosher or not. It comes along the Torah. I guess that was just by way of introduction. Pottery that the Zav touches. Pottery of this person that has a discharge, he touches it, will be broken. You need to break it. Why? They can't kosher it. No way to kosher it. Rinsing it in water is not going to help over here. Right? Comes along the Torah and says, oh, we don't want something wooden. So something wooden can be rinsed in water. That's allowed to be kosher. Now again, I have to double check this. I'm pretty sure we don't kosher wood today. Right? I think there are two opinions, whether we do or don't. I think that we hold that it's not the case, that we don't kosher it in general. But over here, in any case, if a Zav in the time of the temple, time when the temple existed, he touches any wood utensil, becomes impure. And you have to rinse it in water. Right now, comes along Rashi. Rashi says pottery that a Zav will touch. Now, what would I think? All right, let's analyze over here, Rashi says. What would I think? He says, I would think if he touched it. Now, where did he touch it? Torah doesn't tell me. Torah only says pottery the Zav will touch. Okay. Now, where could he touch it? To one or two places. Either he touches it on the outside or he touches on the inside. Now, I might think if he touches on the outside, the whole thing is impure. Right? The whole thing has to be washed. If he touches on the inside, maybe it's on the inside. Maybe the outside doesn't need to be rinsed. Let's see. So he says, I might think that where he touched it on the outside. Because the Medrash says, until you get to the words, what is touching it, which is like touching all of it. Right? In other words, here, what does the Torah say? The Torah says he just touched it. Now the question is, what did he touch exactly? Did he touch the whole thing? Are we saying what it means? Over here to touch it is like he touched the entire thing. Or not. Maybe just touch the outside. And if he touched the outside, what am I going to think? Oh, the outside's impure. Right? So you should say that it means he didn't just touch it, he moved it. Right? Now, maybe touching it is one thing, but touching it over here may mean it means to move. Right? So now we're going to have to analyze over what exactly is going on. Right? In other words, touching all of it, right, should mean that I touched some of it. And if I touch some of it, what would I think? The whole thing's impure. Right? What do I care? What do I care? I touched it on the outside. I touched it on the inside. Wherever I touched it, it's all one vessel. So like I said, he touched, let's say it's a cup. He touched the outside of the cup. Right? If somebody, not me, somebody touches the outside of the cup. What is my assumption? My assumption is the whole thing is tameh. The whole thing is impure. Over here. You got to take it to the mikveh. You got to rinse it off. You got to put it in the mikveh. Right? The fact that it says I touched the outside, who cares? Right? Outside, inside, I touched it. That's it. Or someone else touched it, not me. Someone touched it, made the whole thing impure. Right? What am I thinking over here? Rashi says he touched the outside. maybe the whole thing's not impure, right? Maybe I would have thought maybe the whole thing's not impure. No. He says, once you touch it. Makes the whole thing impure. Don't think such a thing. Right? That's what Rashi seems to say. Now, what does Rashi answer? Rashi says it doesn't mean that if I touch one part of it, that maybe only part of it's impure. The rest of it is pure. Right? He says, don't think that. Right? It's coming to say not that way. If I touch it, the whole thing's impure. So what's it coming to teach me? It's coming to teach you that touching it means moving it. Now, person's gonna say, what's he talking about? Right? What's he talking about over here? If you tell me he touched it. Right? Why do I have to assume he pushed it? Why do I have to assume he moved it? Why do I have to assume anything? Let the Karaites, we'll cut them some slack over here. So a Karaite's going to come along and say, no. When it says touched, it means touched. That's it. Right? That's what it means. The only problem looking at it literally, we're going to explain what Rashi means in a second. What's the problem of looking at it literally? Right? What's the problem with the Karaites over here? Unless you have oral law. It says pottery the Zav will touch. Stop. Forget about what happens to the pottery afterwards. If the Torah tells me pottery that the Zav's going to touch, so what's the obvious question? Kaufman's obvious question would be, what are you talking about? What in the world's going on? What do you mean you touched it? Where? Where did I touch it? The top? The bottom? On the outside? On the inside? It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where I touched. Right? Simply, I would say, wherever you touch. Right? Pottery that a Zav will touch shall be broken. Does the Torah tell me in any which way that if I touch it anywhere, the whole thing's not broken? No. The Torah tells me wherever I touch, you have to break it. That's it. Right? There's no Webster's fifth definition. We're not looking over here for anything hidden. It says wherever I touch. Right? That's what the Karaites will say. Doesn't matter where I touch. Inside, outside. So what's Rashi talking about? Right? Because what's the Havamina? What would I have thought? I would have thought, what in the world's going on? Maybe only touched on the outside. So if he touched it on the outside, what would I have thought? It means nothing for the inside. Maybe it's only the outside needs to have a little water spread on it, not the inside. Comes on Rashi and says, no. It means that I moved it. Now we have to understand what it means to move. Right? What it means to move over here. But there's an obvious question. The question is, what's bothering Rashi? Where did he touch it? And even if he did touch it, who cares? Doesn't matter where he touched it. Up, on the top, the bottom, the back, the side. Who cares? The whole thing should be impure. Finished. What am I arguing over here? Right? The Karaite's going to have to come up with some great definition. They're going to have to come up with a tremendous definition over here because the Torah doesn't tell me anything. So if I was a Karaite, put on my Karaite hat over. I don't have any other hats around here. Put on my Karaite hat. What would a Karaite say? Anywhere. Right? Anywhere I touch, doesn't matter. The pottery becomes impure. Got to be broken. Finished. Nothing else to do. Rashi says, very good. Right? That's what I would have thought. Or maybe I would have thought, maybe it only means on the outside. Maybe it means only in the inside. Maybe it means just the handle. How do I know what it means? He says, that's what I would have thought. What's the problem? The problem is what the Karaite's going to say. That's the problem. Because the Karaite's going to learn anywhere you touch. You're right. So it can't mean to touch just one part of it. Right? We can't just say he touched the bottom. Only the bottom's impure. Once he touched it, the whole thing becomes impure. So good, the Karaite will be happy. But that's not simple explanation. Or maybe it is. Right? Simple explanation is wherever he touches. What's the problem? Doesn't tell me where. Right? I would say according to Rashi, Rashi's saying, oh, what I thought, wherever he touches, that's impure. Right? But the Karaites would say, Rashi, you're out to lunch over here. God forbid. Rashi, what in the world is he talking about? Right? Because the Torah says wherever he touched. Torah makes any distinction? No. Does the Torah need to make any distinction over here? No. Right? That's obvious. Torah's not going to necessarily tell me something. 9 times out of 10, the Torah's coming to teach me something. right? Not necessarily coming to teach me the obvious. Sometimes it is, right? Sometimes the Torah will come and teach me something that I wouldn't have necessarily needed the Torah to tell me. Or it could be the Torah needs to tell me anyway, right? For all future generations, thinking that, oh, we don't, that's so obvious. Why the Torah tell me? Because people are going to make mistakes or whatever the case is. But the Torah is normally telling me something, right? We're not given a reason here. So we're not given any information. So the Torah so we have to figure out what in the world's going on. Because here the Torah makes a simple statement. Seemingly a simple statement, no definitions, no answers, nothing. Right? So now, comes on Rashi and says, maybe it's telling me he touched part of it, and if he touched part of it, he touches the whole thing. That'd be obvious. Right? You wouldn't need me to tell me, you wouldn't need me to teach me that. That's why Rashi says it's a havamina. What's a havamina? I would have thought. Any time in Talmudic literature it says I would have thought this, or I would have thought that, or I would have thought the other thing. What is the Talmud or anything in Talmudic literature going to say? It's going to say reject it. That's not what it means, right? It doesn't mean it for any number of reasons. Right now, what would we say over here? Over here, we would say, of course. If I touch part of it, that means I touched the whole thing, right? The whole thing's impure, right? That's what it means. That's what it would be clear. Comes along Rashi and he says, that's not what it means. What does it mean over here? It means he moved it. Now, where's Rashi get this from? Right? That's the obvious question. Right? Where in the world does Rashi get it from? So, the Medrash says like this. The Medrash says the Zav that is going to touch. Right now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Says the Medrash, I might be able to think if a Zav touched on its outer surface, it should be impure. That's what Rashi said. Right? That's what Rashi was quoting. But it can be derived logically. The Medrash says that this is not the case. Now, what's the logic? Now let's see the Torah's logic here. So here the Medrash says, if a corpse, dead body in the vernacular, is the most severe impurity. Right? You take my word for it. Mishnah says that is the most severe of impurity is a dead body. That someone who is a Zav is not as impure as someone who comes in contact with a dead body. So the logic is like this. The logic is if a dead body whose impurity is more severe than a Zav, and that it becomes impure through contact with the dead. In other words, person comes in contact with the dead, you don't even have to touch it really. You can come in contact with the same house. Meaning, let's say the person died in a house, right? The windows are closed, will make it easy. Person's in that house. He's going to be impure because the whole house is one whole thing of impurity over here. He doesn't even have to come in contact with it. But in general, what does he say? That someone who comes in contact with a corpse becomes impure through contact with the dead. And what happens? Has to undergo a sprinkling, right? Has to have water poured on him or go through water. It says in Numbers chapter 19, verse 19. If that's the case by a dead person, now that's more severe than a Zav, right? A Zav does not have to go through the sprinkling process over here, right? Right? It just means that, whatever he touches becomes impure. Could be his clothing becomes impure. Maybe, he has to go to the mikveh. We'll see. He said a corpse transmits impurity to those under the same roof. Oh, just like Kaufman said, right? In other words, got a dead body in a house. All things being equal, all the windows are shut because the tumor doesn't go out. The impurity doesn't go out. The impurity is all over the house. If the person's in the house, becomes impure. Doesn't even have to touch it. Right? So here says the Medrash, in the case that a corpse transmits impurity to those under the same roof, a Zav does not. In other words, if a Zav's impure, right? He has a discharge, let's say. And now he's walking around the house. Forget he touches anything. He doesn't touch anything. Other people are in the same house. The other people become impure because the Zav's walking around? No, doesn't become impure. Not at all. What happens? If he comes in contact, it's one thing. But what are we saying over here? A corpse is much more severe. A corpse, all you have to do, you don't even have to touch it. Right? A corpse, normally if I touch it, become impure. I don't even have to touch it. Why not? Because mere contact, even in the house, makes a person impure. Right? Unlike a zav. Because a zav does not transmit impurity to pottery through its surface. What would I would think over here? Because what happens is zav touches the pottery. So I would think maybe it doesn't penetrate. He says maybe it doesn't penetrate over here. Maybe he only touches the outer surface. So if it touches the outer surface, what am I thinking? The whole thing does not become impure. But he says don't say that. He says it doesn't stand to reason that a zav who has a lesser impurity, right? Again, the greater impurity is by a corpse. So if a corpse by itself makes someone impure without touching, right, that's more severe. What about something less severe, right? So what about a zav? How's a zav going to transmit impurity over here? He says, does it not stand to reason that a zav who has a lesser impurity should not transmit impurity to pottery through its outer surface? No, right? What's the logic? Right? Let's analyze the logic here. The logic is like this. A corpse, anyone comes in contact with it, even if they don't touch it, becomes impure. Right? What about something less? What about something less, i.e. a zav? Right? A zav, similarly, really can only transmit impurity how? By touching something. Right? Or sitting on something, whatever the case is. But over here, what would I think? I would think it's got lesser impurity. And I would think maybe it doesn't transmit impurity to the outer surface. It's less. Right? What do you call it? A corpse, a dead body, that's much more stringent. If a dead body is much more stringent, anyone who touches it or is even in the same house or whatever with the dead body, they become impure. But I see, not only they become impure, they have to go to the mikveh. They have to have a sprinkling of water over here. So I would say, okay, what about a zav? A zav's at a much lower level, right? A lower level of impurity. Would I really think, if it's on such a lower level, that if it touches the outer part of the pottery over here, the pottery is going to be impure? I wouldn't think that. No, not true. Right? Because we see over here, that's not the case. Now a person could ask, okay, I understand. A corpse is much more severe case of impurity. But a zav is less than that. So if a zav is less than that, why would I think? Maybe I would think that if it touches the pottery, it touches the outside, it doesn't become impure. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it doesn't become impure. Right? He says, don't say that. He said, don't say that. Because even if it's on a low level, so what? Just because it's on a low level doesn't mean it doesn't become impure. Right? That I shouldn't say. So he said, if you say a corpse, now let's look at the other side. If you say a corpse doesn't transmit impurity to pottery through its outer surface, now it's much more severe. But let's say it doesn't transmit impurity over here to pottery through its outer surface. Maybe if it rests on bedding, right? Like we said before, or maybe on a seat. Maybe it makes them a primary source of impurity, right? That's how we understood, right? If someone is a zav, they sat on something. They sat on bedding. They sat on a seat. They sit on a saddle or something like that. That's going to be the main source of impurity. Now, could you say that about a zav who does make bedding or seat a primary source? In other words, if a corpse doesn't, and is, what are you going to say? A corpse doesn't, and it's much more severe. So if we say it's much more severe by impurity, we say by a zav that doesn't apply, we wouldn't say that, right? What's the logic? Because we already know. If a zav sits on something, we know that thing becomes impure. That thing I can't use. Say if I'm going to say, well, it's much more severe by a dead body, and let's say the dead body was on bedding. What? We're not going to say the bedding's impure. Right, only by a zav who sits on something? Of course not. Doesn't make sense the other way either. Right? So, since he makes other things impure with the status of bedding in the seat, also he's going to make pottery impure. Right? So what's the logic here? The logic is we know other information. Right? The other information is like this. The other information is we already understand what that is Zav who touches something or really sits on something, let's say better, sits on bedding, sits on a seat or something like that, that thing's going to be impure. Why? Because he sat on it. There's such a thing as someone who's impure. They sit on something, they make the whole thing impure, right? Even we mentioned if they sit on 10 types of bedding, 10 comforters, right? You tell me the first one it sits on is impure. What about all the ones below it? All of them become impure, right? Same thing. Or let's say someone sat on one piece of bedding. Very simple. Sat on one comforter. Then you put on another comforter on top of that. Another comforter on top of that. They all become impure. Why? Because the first one has the status of the source of impurity. Whatever it touches becomes impure. If I already know before whatever it touches becomes impure, then what's the question over here? Then obviously it becomes impure, right? In other words, if I already know what we said before, if I already have clear what we said before, and how impurity works by Azav, whatever they sit on, and whatever touches that thing they sit on becomes impure, right? So if that's the case, then I understand. Well, wouldn't it make sense if he sat on it becomes impure? What if he touched it? If he touched it, also becomes impure, right? But that's obvious, right? That's obvious. So what's the Torah coming to tell me? The Torah here is coming to tell me. That that someone's going to touch it. Zav's going to touch it, becomes impure, right? It can't necessarily mean to touch. Why? Because we have internal logic. If I sit on it, or a person sat on it, they were impure. They make the whole thing impure. Why in the world am I going to think if I touch part of it, only part of it's impure? The whole thing's impure, right? What's the difference between touching and sitting on it? I would say it's no difference. It's something we already know, something we already understand. So therefore, cannot mean the simple explanation. Because the simple explanation I already know, right? We said before, right? I just saw this. If a person, verse 6, chapter 15, verse 6, one who sits upon an article upon which the Zav will sit, shall immerse his garments, immerse himself in the water, right? He remains impure until evening. So if the Zav, the person who had this discharge, sits on something, right? Whatever it is, you come along and sit on it, you're going to become impure, right? You got to wash your clothing, you got to go to the mikveh. You have to wait till the evening to become pure. So that's if he sat on it. And if he touched it, what are you going to tell me? If he sat on it, he didn't touch it? Of course he touched it. That would be obvious, right? Kara is going to have a little bit of a problem here, right? They're going to have a big problem over here because this doesn't make any sense. It's something I already know. It's something that's already obvious. So comes along Rashi, and Rashi says, you know what it means? Rashi over here says, it doesn't mean that I would have thought you touched the outside. And if you touch the outside, maybe the whole thing's not impure. Doesn't mean that, because I already know whatever the Zav touches, whatever he sits on, same thing, the whole thing's going to be impure. And even if the Zav gets up and he goes away, someone else sat on it, someone put a blanket on it, someone put a vessel on it, that vessel, that blanket's impure. Why? Because it's got that level of impurity, right? It's got the impurity from the person that sat on it. So if that's the case, if he sat on it, you're going to tell me with the straight face, you're going to tell me, come on, he didn't touch it. What do you mean he didn't touch it? How can he not touch it? The Torah says here clear, he touched it. So if he touched it, what's going to be? If he touched it and he touches this pottery, the pottery itself, what's the law? The law is going to become impure, right? You got to break it. But that's obvious. So Rashi says not so obvious. Because I would have thought if I touched part of it, maybe the whole thing. Maybe it's only part of it, but you can't say that. Because I already know if you touched it, you sat on it, whatever the case is, it's the same law. Not going to change. If it's not going to change, what in the world are you telling me over here? Oh, it comes on Rashi, and Rashi says, you know what it means? The fact that he said that he touched it means he moved it. Right? And whatever. And Rashi said, so that we understand now let's understand what it says in the Medrash, right? We didn't finish the Medrash, right? That we said, so what about dead body? Let's just recapitulate, confuse everybody. Just like a dead body, I don't need to touch it. It's the highest level of impurity. If I'm stuck in the house where the body is, all things being equal, no windows open, the whole house is impure, everything in it, just about everything in it. So a person's there, if he becomes impure. So what do you want to tell me? A zav that has less impurity, right? Less level of impurity than a dead body. If it's got less level of impurity, then you tell me if he touches it, maybe he's not impure, right? Maybe the thing you don't have to break, right? So we already know that. You'll say no, right? We already know that. Now let's take the flip side. Let's take the flip side, of that. And that is, so a zav is less severe. The case of the corpse transmits impurity to those under the same roof. A zav doesn't, right? So then the question is, okay, if it doesn't transmit impurity that way, does it not stand to reason the zav who has lesser impurity should not transmit purity to party through its outer surface? What? I'm going to think if it's got lesser impurity, that it's not going to make this thing impure? Of course not. I'm not going to think such a thing. Of course it's going to be impure, right? So what if it's on a lesser level of impurity, right? So we say, no, of course not. But if you're going to tell me a corpse doesn't transmit, you look at the other side. If you're going to tell me a corpse doesn't transmit impurity to pottery through its outer surface, maybe the corpse is on the bedding itself. Maybe it's on the seat. So if the corpse is on something like that, whatever it's lying on, that itself going to be the source of impurity. Right now, can I say that by a zav? Right? But by a zav, I do understand. Makes bedding or seat a primary source. Should be the same thing. Right? In other words, if the case of a corpse is much more severe, then whatever it's going to lie on, it's going to make him pure. Well, what about a zav? Isn't a zav, even if it's less level of impurity, don't we already know whatever it touches, whatever it lies on, right, etc., is going to be impure? Of course. Same thing. Right? So now so we reject that. Right? These are obvious things. This cannot be. So then comes along the Medrash and says, no, it's coming to teach us otherwise. What's it coming to teach us? That it says the zav will touch. It's talking about moving it over here. Right? So what are we talking about? He says we're talking about pottery that has absorbed the juices of a sin offering. Right? That is the case. We're talking about pottery that became wet through the juice of a sin offering in which it was cooked. Right? That you have to go back. You have to reference to Exodus chapter 6, verse 21. Right? You have to go back to that. And just like it's talking about the inside of the vessel, for absorption of the juices comes about through the sin offering cooked inside the vessel, not outside. So too, it means over here the inside. Right? So what am I telling you? On the outside really should mean on the inside. And once we've learned pottery can only become impure through its inner airspace, it's also another general rule of purity and impurity over here by certain vessels that can only become impure through its inner airspace. Then what's the obvious question? Then the obvious question is, why does the Torah say the zav will touch without specifying from the inside? The outside, you can tell me, once a person touches the outside, the whole thing becomes impure. But if a person touched from the inside or from the air, let's say better, the inner airspace, what does that mean? The inside really means the inside. So if that is the case, why does the Torah tell me the zav will touch without specifying from where? The outside, I get it's not going to say. Right? That makes sense. If touch the outside, the whole thing's impure. Right? That would be obvious. But if you want to tell me it's talking about the sin offering, the juices are on the inside, and now he's going to touch that, why didn't the Torah tell me that? All the Torah tells me, again, let's just make clear, the Torah says pottery that a zav will touch. Can't be telling me on the outside. We understand why. So why doesn't the Torah tell me on the inside? on the inner ear space. That's what it should tell me. So therefore, comes along the Medrash, and the Medrash says it refers to a touch which affects all of it. What does it mean it affects all of it? What would I understand? It means that which it touched and not that which it touched inside. The Torah doesn't tell me that, right? It's telling me if I touch it on the inside, does that necessarily mean the outside is tameh? Does it mean that it's not kosher over here? Does it mean it's not impure? Right? Maybe it's only on the inside. Right? The problem is if I touch on the outside. General rule is I touch on the outside, the whole thing's impure. Not necessary if I touch the inner space. If I touch the inner space, who says? Right? One of the commentaries says it refers to a touch which affects all of it. All of it means that which it touched in it. Right? Instead of saying, that which it touched it, not in it. In other words, the Torah needs to tell me that pottery, say that 5 times fast, pottery that is Zav will touch. Right? If I understand it's touching the outside, I get it. It's talking about the whole thing. If I would mention it's talking about the inside, who says if I touch the inside, the inner ear space, the whole thing becomes impure. Right? That's the question here. That's really the answer. Why does it only say it will touch? The Zav will touch. Right? Really should have said will touch inside. No, but it has to be talking about the entire vessel. Right? We could have said very simply, wherever you touch, doesn't matter. It makes that vessel impure. Not true. Right? Because we understand only from the outside. If I touch from the inside, technically from the inside should make the whole thing impure. Right? So we should say, so instead of saying that, the Torah doesn't say that. Right? That's why the Torah does not say within its airspace. So now what does Rashi say from the Medrash? Say it's talking about moving it. If the Zav touched it and he moved it, even indirectly, by pushing it with a stick. Let's say he didn't push it with his hand. We'll make it easy. He pushed it with a stick. He pushes it with the stick over there because this affects the entire vessel. Right? So now it comes full circle here. So we understand why it says don't touch the outside. Because really touching the outside affects the whole thing. Right? Touching the inside doesn't necessarily affect the whole thing. Right? Through this purity and impurity logic. So if it doesn't mean touching the whole thing, when am I ever going to have a case where if a person touched it, even if he touched it from the inside, it's talking about the entire vessel, right? That's the assumption that touching the inside does not affect the whole vessel. That's our obvious assumption. Because if I would say if I touch the inside, it affects the entire vessel, makes the whole thing impure, and then you're going to say it doesn't matter where he touches it, right? But we understand it does matter. Because if he touches it from the outside, again, it's talking about the whole vessel. So over here, why would I think Rashi says, according to the Medrash, why would I think it's talking about moving it? Because it really should have said the case was you had juice from the sin offering. It's talking about where he touched inside the vessel. If he touched inside the vessel, the whole vessel doesn't necessarily become impure. If the whole vessel doesn't become impure, how can I find the case, according to the Medrash? How can I find a case where the whole vessel is going to become impure if you touch it? Because the Torah here tells me pottery that a Zav is going to touch has to be broken. It must mean the whole thing is impure. What case can I find that the whole thing is impure? Even if I touch the inside, says the Medrash, he must have moved it. He must have moved it. Now, it doesn't mean directly over here. That would be obvious, right? If he moved it directly, fine, right? That would make that would be an obvious case. It doesn't even have to be that obvious. He can even move it even indirectly. He can take a stick and move it. Now, you're going to say, why should that matter? Why should moving it matter in any way, shape, or form? Oh, very simple. Because I'm looking for a case. I'm looking for understanding why the whole vessel becomes impure, right? If he touches one part of it and he moves it, and he touches from the inside, okay, then I can understand maybe the whole thing is impure. But if I don't touch it from the inside, right? Let's say that's not the case. So now he takes a stick, he takes something else, and he moves it. I need a case over here, says the Medrash, where the whole vessel is going to become impure. And the rationale is because touching from the inside, for whatever reason, right, according to the Torah logic, for whatever reason, does not make the entire thing impure. Touching from the outside, it does, right? That's what I would have thought, but it can't mean that because that's obvious. We already know it from other sources. If we already know it from other sources, it must mean he must have touched it from the inside. What's the case from inside? It's the case of Leviticus chapter 6, verse 21. Talks about the sin offering. But again, if I touch it from the inside, well, why didn't it tell me that? Then you tell me the whole vessel's impure. Oh, can't say that because that's not the case. That's not Torah logic over here. Torah logic says if I touch from the inner, what's the word there? Inner airspace, right? We'll use my cup here as an example. I touch the inner airspace. I don't touch the vessel. I go in the inner airspace. Doesn't mean I necessarily touched it. Maybe it does, but it's talking about the inner airspace. Right? If I touch the inner airspace, maybe it makes the whole thing impure. That might be obvious. Might be 100% obvious. So it can't be that because the Torah doesn't tell me that. The Torah doesn't use that word that he touched within it. All the Torah tells me, again, I'm going to repeat 4 times here or 5 times. The pottery the Zav touched the pottery. He touched it. So if he touched it from the inner airspace, what does that mean? Gee, I don't know. I might think it means the whole thing's impure. Doesn't mean that. Right? Torah's not telling me that because it would have said it. So if the Torah doesn't say it, what does the Medrash mean over here? It must mean he moved it. He could have moved it with his hand. That would be obvious. Doesn't even have to move it with his hand. He needs to do something in order that the whole thing is affected. Right? To make the whole thing impure. See, again, if I touch it from the outside, the whole thing's affected. Because it's all one thing. If I touch it from the inside, not necessarily. Right? If I touch it from the airspace, doesn't work that way. So if it doesn't work that way, find me a case. The Medrash says, what is the case according to the Medrash where it's going to affect the whole thing? The only way it's going to affect the whole thing, says the Medrash, is if it moves. That's it. And it doesn't have to move directly. It can move 100% indirectly. And if it moves 100% indirectly, it's still going to be impure because that's moving the entire vessel. Right? So explains Rashi. According to the Medrash. Now, again, I always want to make clear. When the Torah says something, whatever it is, when the Torah makes a statement, we have to think about what it says. Right? We cannot read it like a person is going to, read a newspaper. You got to think, okay, if this Zav touches this pottery, right, it's going to be broken, right? Now, alarm bell should awaken. The alarm bell should say, well, Torah doesn't tell me anything. So it just tells me he touched it. Tell me where? No. Does it move? I don't know. Doesn't tell me anything. Right? So now the Karaites going to have to understand what this means. They're going to have to come up according to their own, quote unquote, deciphering of the Torah. They're going to have to come up with an explanation. So they'll say, well, we have our own oral law. We have our own way to explain it. Okay? Right? Be more than happy to hear. Right? Rashi here, okay, quotes the Medrash. Right? He quotes the Medrash because he says this is what it means. This is how to explain it because the verse itself is problematic. Right? And I asked my Rebbe this many years ago. I was learning a certain place and whatever, a certain tractate. It was talking about certain words that either had vavs in it or didn't have vavs in it, etc. Like the word sukkot. Sometimes it does have a vav, sometimes it only has a dot on top, right? So the whole thing, there was a whole, the whole long explanation by Tosfos about how to, try to understand, certain words and how we learn them, and they do have a vav, they don't have a vav, and and whatever, basically different ways how to understand verses. So there was this whole long, Tosfos quoted a whole bunch of different sources, So as my Rebbe, I said, what am I supposed to take out of this? How in depth should I really try and learn it to try and really understand what's going on? And he told me the following. He says, we don't know how to learn verses at all. Right? Tell the Christians that. Right? They're the ones who make up things, in the verses themselves. Right? The Rebbe said clear. We don't know how to learn verses in general. He says, go through it, look into it, and then move on. Don't get bogged down, because this is something that's already lost. Right? It's already lost. If you want to say we're on the level of Ibn Ezra, one of the great grammarians, one of the greatest grammarians, in the Bible itself, biblical literature. You tell me other people, like Rashi, his grandson, the Rashbam, the Sforno, others, right, who knew how to learn up verses because they had all the Torah, all the Talmud, they had it in the palm of their hand, right? So they understood how to read verses. We don't understand how to read verses, right? We look at a verse, and it's interesting. People want to learn Kabbalah. People want to learn all kinds of things that are more esoteric. They're simple verses of Torah people don't understand, right? So they're looking to learn all these different things. What's going to get them? Oh, it's so esoteric. It's so this, it's so that. Makes them feel like in another planet. That's beautiful. Doesn't mean they understand anything, right? So the Torah has to be learned, right? The book of Genesis in general. Rashi says I can only explain things according to the Medrash because simple explanation of my language doesn't make any sense at all, right? So I had a professor in college says, yeah, you're going to have to rely on the world of Medrash. You're going to have to rely, what the Talmud says. We're going to go back to the old ancient languages. Very good. What are you going to get out of that? You're going to learn the Babylonian language, Ugaritic. How many people know Ugaritic today? Almost nobody, right? What's it relevant to? Almost nothing, except for these quote unquote biblical scholars. So I would answer, okay, you want to learn Ugaritic? That's beautiful. You want to learn this Babylonian language? Great. Tell me what this means. Tell me why the Torah starts out with creation. Tell me what the first line of the Torah says. Even better. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Right? Let's call a spade here. The word Bereshit. What's the root of the word? Right? The root of the word could be Bet Reish Aleph. What does the word Bet Reish Aleph mean? To create. The only problem is it says Bereshit bara. It says creation in the second word, to create, past tense. So what are you going to say? In the creating of the creation? A little bit hard, right? A little bit hard to translate, right? So others are going to explain the base in front of the word Reshit is really not part of the roots. It means in the first, right? In the first, Reshit means first. Rashi refers to a number of things that are called first, right? We're not even going to get into it, right? But the problem is, how do I learn up the verse? People will say, well, translation says, in the beginning of God's creating. Well, that's a very, poetical way of reading it. But if I go through Rashi over there, and there are a bunch of Rashis, very long Rashis, trying to explain why you have a double language of creation, right? It says, Bereshit bara, same root of the word. So just tell me, Bereshit Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Right, God created in the beginning the heaven and the earth. Why are you using the second word of creation? So someone's going to say, emphasis. I'm going to use it for emphasis. What are you going to use it for emphasis for? There's a big problem. All the commentaries, Rashi, the Ramban, the Rashbam, the Sforno, the Kli Yakar, all of them, right? Later commentaries, early commentators, they're all bothered by the first verse in many ways, right? Why you start with creation anyway, Rashi asks. But that's the first question Rashi says. Problem is, what do you do with the construction of the verse? The verse doesn't make sense. You can't translate it. I understand how it's translated. You have to understand where the translation comes from. A lot of work goes into translating. A lot of bad translations out there. A lot of good translations out there, as well. But if I would look at it at face value, I'm stuck. How in the world, without looking at any comments, right? We're going to be Karaites. We're going to be the best Karaites ever. So what are we going to do? we are going to translate it to the best of our ability. We're not going to use any, we're not going to rely on the Talmud. We're not going to rely on the Medrash. We're not going to, we're going to rely on you tell me what it says. You tell me what it says. I have no idea what it says. It's impossible to translate. There are many verses like this that are very hard to translate, either because the language is difficult, there's double language, let's say, or the words themselves can have other connotations. How am I going to know if it has other connotations? Oh, very good. That's what you need oral law for, right? Because over here, it's a similar thing. If I would say in general, this is what it means, a simple explanation, whatever it is, but I have a similar source that says the same thing, then what's going on? Right? What am I going to answer over here? If it's the same thing, the Torah cannot repeat itself. Maybe you tell me, okay, Book of Deuteronomy goes through a lot of mitzvahs that are already explained before. So the commentaries go to town telling us there are different aspects of the mitzvahs that weren't given. Right? One explanation. Not the full mitzvah was given before. Right? Just like circumcision. Right? You see by Abraham. And the commentaries say that's the source for circumcision. The problem is the Torah wasn't given. So now in Parshas Tazria, chapter 14, it says if you have a son, you do circumcision on the 8th day. Right? That everyone agrees. On the 8th day. But what do I need the verse for? I already learned it by Abraham. If I already learned it by Abraham, what's my simple explanation? So fine. Abraham did it. God agreed, but the command wasn't given till later. One explanation. Right? The command wasn't given until after Mount Sinai. One explanation. What's another possible explanation? Another possible explanation is that when God commanded him to do it, he didn't give him the full mitzvah. Part of the mitzvah was missing. And then when the command was given later, the full mitzvah was given. Right? Another possible explanation. Give me many explanations. Right? But if I know other information, the problem is if I know other information, I cannot look at the Torah at face value because there's other things going on. There might be contradictions. Right? There might be verses that seem to say the same thing. The Torah's not going to repeat itself. So if I'm a Karaite, I put on my Karaite here, which I don't have. Right? If I be a Karaite, so I have to come up with an explanation why things are repeated. Right? Emphasis you can't always answer. Right? Maybe you say it's more severe. Torah says mot yumat. Right? That a person does X thing, you'll surely die. Right? That's how we translate it. You will die and you will die. What does it mean you will die? So what is a more flowy translation? We'll say you will surely die. You'll definitely die. Okay. But why double language? Right? So Karen could say, well, emphasis. Right? We're interested in emphasis over here to show how severe it is. Okay. Right? You're going to say that all the time? You're going to say it across the board? Does it ever change? Right? We understand it's something else. You die in this world. You're supposed to be killed in this world. You don't have a portion of the world to come. Right? That's how we learn it. That's how the rabbis learn it. Someone wants to come up with another explanation. Again, there are some verses more obvious than others. Right? Make more sense than others. Okay. But other things, there are details that are missing. There could be many details missing. If there are many details missing, or I see that it's already been said before, then I have to try and re-understand what it means or understand the other verse, right, in that proper context. Because the problem is most of the Torah doesn't give us explanation, right? So that is a knock against the Karaites we mentioned many times. And the reason is because we don't need oral law. Well, how do you explain certain things if we don't have oral law? Without oral law, we don't understand anything. We understand that, right? But, here's a good example, right? I always like to put out good examples to knock out the Karaites, right? And the reason is because over here, it doesn't give me any information, right? The Torah just says the pottery that the Zav touches, you have to break. Okay, we understand what a Zav is, right, to a certain extent. I mean, the Torah didn't really give us definition, right? But, we have more of a definition through oral law. This doesn't tell me anything, right? Not only does it tell me anything, or maybe it tells me something, but, I could ask a very simple question. without going into this whole long medrash. I could ask very simple. I already know if a zav sits on something, the thing becomes impure, because that's the first level of impurity, whatever it touches. So what are you telling me it touches? It's the same thing. Right? It's the exact same thing. So the Karaites have to have an answer. Right? They have to come up with some sort of, some sort of answer. Right? But before a person will start looking at the commentaries, and this is how real learning is really done, we're just lazy. And we just say, okay, what does Rashi say over here? Before Rashi says anything, we got to think what's going on. Right? What in the world is going on? How do I understand? Right? How do I understand what the verse says? Right? Because if we're really thinking well, we may come up with some questions that the commentaries ask. A person's learning Talmud, same thing. If a person's learning well, they should come up with a lot of the questions the commentaries come up with. You don't just read and say, okay, let's look at this, let's look at that, let's look at the other thing. Before you do that, think, what in the world's going on? Is this really so clear? Is this clear cut? Are there any questions I should be asking? Etc. Then we see what Rashi does. Right? Then we see the brilliance of Rashi. What's Rashi commenting on? How is he thinking? Right? What does he want over here? But in general, we're very lazy. Tissue generation, I would call it, or a Teflon generation. We're lazy. Right? We're not going to sit here and break our heads. We're never going to cover any ground. Right? Do you want to cover some ground? Very good. So now I come to this verse, and I say, okay, let's see what Rashi says. Right? Then you say, wow, look what Rashi here is commenting on. I could have read it and not thought anything. Right? I could have missed the whole point. Right? And so my Rebbe said, I've heard others say, bring it down as well. If when a person, learns the parsha each week, read it twice in Hebrew, and you should read it in Aramaic. Some say if you don't understand Aramaic, and read it in English, right? But you should go through Rashi's commentary. Why? First of all, he elucidates a lot of things, right? A lot of things we never would have thought of. But not only that, if you want to understand what fear of heaven is, right? I've gotten this question a lot. People say, how do we in this weak generation, how do we get the fear of heaven? How do we get the fear of heaven? Right? One, it's not just about learning Musa. Not just about thinking how God runs the world, and the moon, the stars, and how small we are. Yeah, that's also good. That's also good. Another way, right? Look at the greatness of Rashi over here, right? If a person wants to have fear in heaven and they want to feel really small, all you have to do is read the parsha with Rashi, right? But you can't just read it. You got to think. You got to think. There's a good book out. I think they did Genesis and the Book of Exodus. It was called "What's Bothering Rashi." I don't know if he finished the whole series. Right? It's a series called "What's Bothering Rashi." So he takes certain Rashis, right, throughout the Book of Genesis, and I think in the Book of Exodus. I don't know if he finished the whole thing or not. I don't remember if he finished the whole set or not. But basically, he's giving you insight into what's bothering you. Right? He's like spoon feeding you. Right? In other words, Rashi says this. Okay, so where's he get it from? What is he bothered by in the text? Right? That's real learning. Right? I mean, okay, you are being spoon fed. I'm not saying not, but that's how you learn. Because when you look at something and you read something, think, does this make sense? Say, well, maybe I'll take it to face value because I don't know anything else. Could be. Right? But if something sounds strange, think about it. Either you got it wrong or maybe the person got it wrong. Could very well be. Maybe the person made a mistake. Right? But, there's a lot of things here that Rashi elucidates that, can put the fear of God into a person. And the reason, because you just see the greatness of one person. You see what he elucidates, what he brings to the world. Imagine that, there were people in the world before Rashi came along and they understood oral law. Rashi came along, made it much easier. Much, much easier. Right? Made Chumash much easier. Made the prophets much easier. But there was a time in history before Rashi, they didn't need Rashi. They understood what it meant. Right? That's why they passed it down orally. If we didn't have Rashi today, we know anything. Right? We wouldn't know how to learn. Okay, now we have good translations. Talmud's in translation. prophets are in translation. They're good translations. A person doesn't know Hebrew. You need a good translation. And even if you know Hebrew, right? I was looking at something today, just started the first chapter of Isaiah. And as you can imagine, anyone who's ever studied Isaiah, there's a lot of imagery, right? So you have to understand what he's saying, what he's getting at. Some things are, I think, are more obvious. Some things are much clearer. Other things, okay. There are different things going on. So one of the commentaries I have is the Vilna Gaon. Rav Elijah Vilna more than 250 years ago, and Torah giant, no question about it. Probably would have been Torah giant in any generation, even in Rashi's generation, right? That's how great he was. But that whole thing I saw this morning, okay, he quoted a Zohar. He quoted Kabbalah. Now, normally, I wouldn't necessarily delve into it too much. Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, not my area of expertise, by any stretch, right? But he brought something out, different levels of certain things in the verse itself. What it was talking about. Very deep understanding, right? He's talking about in general different levels of healing, right? 5, 6, I think 7 different levels, or 4 or 6 different levels, I think he brought down of different aspects of healing, that the Gaon understood according to Kabbalah, right? He brought it down according to Kabbalah. So whatever, I was going through it anyway. So I said, okay, let's see what he says. Let's see if I can figure out what's going on. What's going on over here. And it was unbelievably deep. Right? No question. Right? But gave basic explanation about how healing works. Right? That's no question. That there's no question. Right? But you could say, okay, even without that, other commentaries, also, gave different explanations or similar, let's say better, similar explanations, of what was going on. In general, I got the general picture. Some disagreed in different nuances, whatever. He came along, the Malbim, right? Whole different thing, whole different way of understanding, right? The Gaon was according to Kabbalah, Malbim, go according to something else, whatever it was, right? So it boggles the mind. Why do I bring this up? Because it boggles the mind in so many ways that you got Christians that got the biggest mouths in the world. We understand the Bible, and you don't understand. They just quote certain things, whatever. How in the world can they understand? They can understand anything without any running commentary. They'll say, well, we have our own Christian scholars. Okay. But you're too busy messing things up and misinterpreting, etc. There are a lot of things at face value. If you just read the verse itself, right? What's it talking about? I'll give one example. I'll just throw out one example. Because I haven't got very far in the book of Isaiah because there's just a lot there. So Isaiah says at the very beginning, right? We'll just quote him here. Prophet Isaiah says, chapter 1. He says, the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, verse 1, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Yosam, Achaz, and Hiskiah, kings of Judah. Then he says, verse 2, hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth, for Hashem has spoken. Children are raised and exalted, they rebelled against me. Right? An ox knows its owner, doggy its master's trough. Israel does not know my people. Right? Israel does not know, my people do not comprehend. Right? Musa, he's giving a rebuke to the Jewish people. Now, if you read this, say, very good, right? Gives a little bit of history of Isaiah, so to speak, and then he gives Musa. Well, what's the obvious question? It says the vision of Isaiah. The vision of Isaiah. Does it tell me now in the next number of verses what the vision is? Doesn't tell me anything. He just tells me, okay, the Jews are getting rebuked over here. If I remember correctly, let me just quote it here. Chapter 6. If you look at chapter 6 of Isaiah, what does he say? In the year of King Uzziah's death, right? Because what did he say at the beginning? He said the vision of Isaiah, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah. All of a sudden, where's the Uzziah? It doesn't say anything. Comes chapter 6. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting upon a high and lofty throne. Its legs filled the temple, sruffing certain angels, verse 2, standing above at his service, each one 6 wings, 2 covered face, blah, blah, blah. Right? Whatever the vision was, that he saw. Right? I can't wait to get there. I don't know if we'll get there that soon. But you have to ask the question, right? This is critical learning here. Right? He says the vision of Isaiah. That's beautiful. Where's the vision? Right? If I were writing the book, I'd say, okay, show me the vision. Right? Show me where the vision is. Doesn't say that. It goes into the whole thing of rebuke. Right? It's chastising the Jewish people. Right? So the commentaries go to town. That's the obvious question. Right? So yeah, we could be lazy and just read through and say, oh, I got this, I got that. I got the other thing. I get the message. You're right. Maybe you get the message. Or you get certain aspects of the message. Right now, when you get to chapter 6 of Isaiah, and it's talking about the angels and this and that, what does that represent? Oh, so now you get to see. Now we have to see over there. Right? We'll have to see what the Christians do with that. You have to see what the commentaries do with that over there. But if he's talking about a vision, where's the vision? Right? And there are times Isaiah changes what he's talking about. A lot of things, most things have to do with context. Right? If you don't look at it in context, you miss the point. So what do the Christians do? They're very good. They take it out of context. Right? They don't know, must be a reference to this, must be a reference to that. It doesn't say that. Right? You have to see it in context. Right? Obviously. So, so as my Rebbe would say, okay, you're going to learn it. Think. Don't just read what it says. Think about what it says. And then we start looking and we see what the commentaries say. That's a whole different thing. Right? That's a whole different level. Now, could be, let's say a person read that, they weren't really thinking so much. It's okay, let's see what the commentaries say. I don't see any novelties here. And all of a sudden, Rashi, the Radak, other commentaries, they're all bothered. Where's the vision? Like what vision? When we go back and read the verse, it says that Isaiah had a vision. Right? So you missed the whole thing. The commentaries are going to town on something, on a very basic point you missed. Right now, does that mean, while I'm on this topic, does that mean you're going to catch every single nuance? No. Right? The main thing is we're not grammarians. Right? If we were grammarians, we'd rip sentences apart. We're trying to understand. Is it talking about the past, talking about the future? Right? What exactly is it? Is it speaking about why is it changed? Right? Why does it change? Over here, I knew somebody many years ago, a Jew, a religious Jew, and he says, yeah, I'm learning Tanakh without commentary. Now, I think it's a good thing just to get a basic understanding. A person wants to learn Tanakh just to run through it, just to understand some of the stories and what's going on just historically, etc. I think you got to sit back. I mean, how in the world are you going to understand anything? How are you going to understand anything, with that, without any commentary? Makes no sense, right? Doesn't make any sense why that should be, right? Totally doesn't make sense, right? Why in the world that should be, that a person's going to understand that. But, someone says, yeah, I'm going to learn it without commentary. Okay. I mean, how much are you really going to get out of it? But if you take the most difficult passages and you're going to say, I'm going to understand it, whatever, without any oral law, without anything, a person's going to be lost, right? A person's going to be lost. Yeah, so I want to mention one other thing. I'll take questions here. The Balatorim, the son of the Rosh, comment over here. What does it mean to touch? What does it mean to touch over here? Pottery the Zav will touch has the same numerical value as to sit on. Just so whatever he touches, the whole thing becomes impure. So too anything he sits on, the whole thing is going to become impure. Right? That's what the Balatorim, son of the Rosh, says. So interesting. He just says that the gematria, every letter has a numerical value. Right? Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3. So if you take the numerical value, he says of the touch, which is 83, it's the same thing as this other word to touch, which is the same, which is 1975. Yeah, it's 88. 70. 1 second. So they got 65, 75, 75, and 9 is 84, right? You got also the same thing, right? So what it means is to touch it means to move it, right? That's what it means numerically. So explains the Balaturim. So take any questions. That is learning Genesis on his own. Right? You cannot, let's say like this, right? The first 6 days of creation are all Kabbalah, right? 99% of it is Kabbalah. Very, very hard to understand. Even if you go through the commentaries, very hard to understand, right? What in the world's going on in creation? But that I would say is the worst place to start if you're going to learn it without commentary. You can't start there. I mean, you could in theory, but in general, if you look at the book of Genesis, you look at the story of Noah and the flood, you look at Abraham, you look at Isaac, you look at Jacob, you look at all kinds of different stories. At face value, they make no sense, right? If you're saying, well, if they kept a lot of Torah before it was given, whatever that means, how could they have done this? How could they have done that? How could they have done the other thing? Right? The Messiah comes from the King David, comes from Ruth. Ruth comes from Moab. Moab comes from an incestuous relationship. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make logical sense. They want to tell me you're going to learn that at face value? And that's the end result? That we understand is the end result? Right? However far Ruth is from the king of Moab. Some say she was granddaughter, great-granddaughter, right? There's a question how old, how far she was, because Boaz certainly very old when she marries him, right? So the question is how close really she is to the king of Moab, right? But she comes from Moab, that's clear. Book of Ruth states clear she comes from Moab, right? That there's nothing to talk about. If she comes from Moab comes from the relationship between Lot and his daughters. That's where the Messiah comes from. That's a little bit problematic. That's a little bit hard to understand. The story of Tamar and Yehuda, also very hard to understand. Right? There are a lot of things in general in the book of Genesis that at face value, very, very hard to understand. I would say a lot of things in the book of Exodus, Leviticus also. Not so easy to understand. Right? But these stories, and how the Jewish people were built and what they have to go through, and all these different things, and all the trials and tribulations, if you don't get background information, what's going on, very hard. One example, just give one example. It says that, Abraham leaves, his father's old, right? Seemingly, people would ask, how can he leave his elderly father? What about honoring his father, even if he's an idolater? Right? The whole question, did he have to honor him or not? Whatever, the whole question, someone who's evil or someone who's an idolater, etc. But be that as it may, it's a question. What about honoring his father? The commentaries do answer, right? They do answer what was going on. But, if we look at things at face value, how could Jacob marry two sisters? Right? That's forbidden. Right? Torah says it's forbidden. How could Moshe Rabbeinu's father marry his aunt? Also forbidden. Right? Also forbidden. We're going to say the savior of the Jewish people takes the Jewish people out of Egypt and he comes from a relationship that's forbidden, seemingly. Could be certain things were permitted. Certain things were permitted even though later they would become forbidden. Right? I'll give another obvious question. Right? The obvious question would be, Yaakov marries Rachel. right? He marries Rachel. What happens? Rachel gives the signs to Leah, right? Because you can't marry a younger sister before the older sister. She doesn't want to embarrass Leah. So he wakes up in the morning, finds out it's Leah. Now there's an obvious question. He didn't have any intention to marry Leah. If he's got zero intention to marry Leah, we all know, well, if you don't know, you'll know now. When a person gets married, when Jew gets married, and he says, and you say, you are betrothed to me according to the laws of the Jewish people. And Moses, right, Moses and Jewish people, you have to know who that person is. You have to see who that person is. So how can it be? Yaakov married someone and it was a mistake. Right? He finds out later it's a mistake. So how can he stay married to her? Right? He really wanted to marry Rachel. He had all intention. Right? All intents and purposes to marry Rachel. And he finds out later it's Leah. We would call that a mekachtos. It's a mistake. If it's a mistake, the marriage is invalid. So why does he stay married to her? Forbidden. Not allowed to be married to her. Right? The commentaries also answer. But they also answer. I'll just give a quick answer. Right? And that is because he understood that God wanted to build the Jewish people through her as well. So he understood, even though it was the wrong one, he never had intention for her. Right? But he understood this is what God wanted. And as much as he was a trickster, and he told Rachel, I'm the greatest trickster in the world because I tricked my brother, I'm not going to get fooled over here. He got fooled. He got played over here. He got fooled. So what happened? You're going to say, well, maybe he got punished. Oh, he's not allowed to be married to two sisters. So when he came into the land of Israel, Rachel dies. Right? Because, it's a higher standard living in the land. So she ends up dying because of it. Could be other reasons why also, but okay. Right? But he can't be married to two sisters. He can't be married to two sisters. How does he stay with her? Because he understood. He understood that this is what God wanted. And as much as he worked hard not to be tricked, he got tricked. Right? One explanation. Could be a myriad of explanations. But there are many things just in the book of Genesis. Many, many things. We could ask 100 questions. We'd be here till tomorrow. Right? We could ask 100 questions on a lot of different things that at face value doesn't make any sense. I mean, Tamar and Yehuda, not allowed to be with his daughter-in-law. He got tricked. He got tricked because he didn't give his youngest son. So if he didn't give his youngest son, there's a whole discussion whether he stayed with her, he didn't stay with her. But the bottom line is, he wasn't allowed to be with her. But who comes out of her? Twins. She has twins. And kingship goes through the tribe of Yehuda. Right? Goes through Judah over here. It's kind of funny. Kind of funny how it happens. Right? The scepter never leaves from Judah. The scepter never leaves from Judah. You want to tell me his daughter-in-law dresses up like a prostitute and he's with her and that's where kingship comes from? Very hard to understand. A lot of things very hard to understand. Right? I would say Genesis, at least the very beginning, no question, creation, and probably throughout all the stories. Right? A lot of them. Simple explanation don't make sense. That the brothers, as great as they were, how could they be so cruel? Throw Joseph in a pit, they screaming this and that, and they sell him, and they sit there and eat. If they're so great, how could they do such a thing? Even though maybe, he deserved to die, maybe, right? Still, maybe they went too far. I mean, there are a lot of things, right? So it doesn't make sense in general that a person thinks, oh, I know better. What do I need Rashi? What do I need the commentaries for? What do I need other things? I can learn it just as well. 100% I can learn it. I can learn it just as well. Really? How could you learn it just as well? And how are you going to explain? I mean, maybe you come up with a good explanation. I don't know. How's the person going to explain Lot and his daughters and King David the Messiah? That's a little bit hard to explain. A lot of things very hard to explain. Right? Even with explanations, it's hard to understand. Right? Again, we're just scratching the surface. That's what we're doing here. We can delve into it deeper, learn it differently than we learned it last year. Look at other commentaries, different things. We get more depth, but the more depth we get, the more we understand what comes out of it. What comes out of it is the more we don't understand, right? That's it. And the greater we are in knowledge, what should happen is it should make us more humble. That's what should happen. But a lot of times it doesn't, because the person is going to say, wow, look at all I learned. Look how great I am. This person doesn't know as much as me. That person doesn't know as much as me. But the Mishnah Perkei Avos says, right, what are you saying you're so great for? Isn't that what you're created to do anyway? You're created to learn. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be close to me. This is what you're supposed to do your whole life. So now you're patting yourself on the back. And now you're saying, what a great thing. How great I am, because look at all the Torah I learned. Right? Not the case. Totally not the case. So I would really say the entire Torah, 80% doesn't make sense logically. You definitely need the commentaries to learn. There's no question. Some people like some of them more, some of them less, whatever. Right? But you have to have some level of understanding here. Understanding on our own, or what we say over here, what I might have thought. When we look at these things, we say, come on. That there has to be a lot more going on. And I would say the same thing about Tanakh. Tanakh is even more clouded. Certainly when you get to the prophecies about the end of days. Right? We just read over Sukkot about Gog and Magog, and Malachi chapter 14, right? And Ezekiel chapter 38, 39. Right? It says over there about the war of Gog and Magog. Right? It says all these different things nobody knows. Right? It's clouded in secrecy. Right? We can't figure these things out. We'll never figure these things out. Doesn't mean we don't have to learn it. Doesn't mean it's not part of the Torah. Right? No question. Right? But there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things hidden. That are so far hidden that we have to do our best to uncover. That's all we're doing. We're trying to uncover layers. The more layers we uncover, the more humility we should have. That's the reality. What's the reason? Very simple. The reason is because I need to understand, and I need to realize. I need to realize one very simple thing. And that is, I wouldn't be anywhere. Nobody, would be anywhere without these commentaries. Wouldn't be anywhere, wouldn't understand anything. All the more so, how can someone claim? I mean, they could make the claim. It's a false claim, right? But how can someone say, oh, this is talking about this, and it's a hint to that, and a hint to the other thing, when a lot of times the historical inaccuracies. And the Christians don't care about historical inaccuracies in general. Doesn't bother them. Contradictions doesn't bother them. Should, but it doesn't. Even if that is the case, I understand why they're going to take things out of context. That I understand. Right? But to try and say, I understand what's going on, and this represents this, there are many other things going on. Many other verses that they're either not looking at, most likely, or if they looked at it, they're giving their own spin. Right? They're giving their own interpretation. Right? And when they give their own interpretation, they look silly, because that's not what it says. They're saying it's a hint, and it's a this, and it's a that. Well, the Torah doesn't say it, right? So you'll say, well, the commentaries say like this and say like that. Why can't I give my explanation? Well, if that was the case, then, you'd say, well, I'm just as great as the rabbi. I say, well, they have their opinion, I have mine, right? But, as we do understand, many of them had the ability to resurrect people from the dead, just the generation wasn't worthy. Right? So if that would be the case, who are we to compare ourselves to that? They'll say, well, my opinion is valid. Okay. Right? Someone here mentions about choosing a king. Choosing a king over Israel. Right? They begged, right? Then it was a big mistake. That God's, okay, you want a king? I'll give you a king. Right? So someone asked, should we be yearning for a Davidic king? Why not? That's what the Messiah is. That's our yearning, we say every day. Right? After davening, after we pray. Or we should say it sometime during the day, and that is we're waiting for the Messiah to come. We're waiting for him to clean up all this mess. 100%. Right? That is what we're waiting for. Right? We need it. It's not the same thing, as demanding a king way back when. That was a whole different thing. Now they said we want to be like the other nations. We also want to have a king. Right? We also want, that's all we did on Rosh Hashanah. We made God king. Right? God is king of above, below, everywhere. So God is king everywhere. Right? So you want his kingship to return. You're right. But when is that kingship going to return? That kingship is only going to return when the Messiah comes. That's when it's going to return. Right? It's not going to return before that. So obviously we don't have that. Right? The Messiah has not come. We are 100%, we are living in the Messianic era. That everyone would agree. Right? We're living in the Messianic era, but the Messiah hasn't come. So we can, they're one and the same. We can say we want the Messiah to come now, and that de facto means we also want God to rule. Right? A flesh and blood king, quote unquote, the Messiah obviously is God's bidding over here. It's bringing God down to this world by bringing the Beis Hamikdash, by, killing whoever deserves to be killed, right? And bringing the temple back, right? And sacrifices and all that. But they're one and the same, right? Don't we want God to be king? You're right. We do want him to be king. We have to make him king in this world, right? We have to declare his kingship. We're his servants. We have to spread the word. True. Not looking for converts to bring other Jews back. And if someone's interested in learning, fine, right? A non-Jew wants to learn, that's great. I don't have to go look for him. Some people might think, mistakenly. But even if that's the case, you're right. We want to make God king every day. But making God king every day, we're still lacking the Messiah. There's no question. Kingship isn't complete. Kingship only is complete when the Messiah comes, brings in the exiles, right? He gathers in the exiles. We build the temple, right? He can't die in the process. The king of David, the Messiah of David cannot die in the process, right? And he's going to build the temple. He's going to bring in the exiles, right? But making God king, we have to do that every day, right? Specifically in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. When we say the Shema, right? We declare God is one. The Eleno prayer is making God king. It's bowing down to him and no other false gods. So yeah, we do make God king every day. We also have Rosh Hashanah to do that. But we also need the Messiah. Messiah is a different issue, right? God cannot be complete, so to speak, or make him king unless we're living in the Torah state, unless we have the Messiah, unless we have the temple. So God's throne is broken at the moment in a certain way. Broken in the sense that it's not whole. We don't have the Messiah. We don't have the temple, right? And that's what I would answer to that. Yeah, somebody asks, Exodus, Joshua related the son of Nun, right? As though Nun was an important person. So what is Nun? Right, interesting question. So either you tell me he was significant in and of himself, right? And that's the way they talked. The son of this one, the son of that one. Then I understand I mentioned his father. Or in other words, his father, his father's great. Comes along the Ramban, and he says really it should be bin Nun, right? Not Ben, not the son of, right? So what does it mean? It could mean from the word bina, the word understanding, right? He's the one that understood, right? It's according to Joshua out of respect of his intellectual capability. We do understand that Joshua Yoshua was Moshe Rabbeinu's prize student, right? He was a lad who would not depart the tent of study, right? As is brought down in Exodus chapter 33, verse 11, right? No question about that. Some explain also that again, the son of Nun, meaning he was his biological child, right? But also, even though he's a biological child, is really the son of Moshe Rabbeinu also, right? Even though he's a student, the student's considered a son, right, as well. So it's a hint, right? It might be a hint to dual parentage, so to speak. Another explanation, can be that the Medrash says God changed Sarai's name to Sarah. So the Yud, which was removed from the name, to be substituted with the Hey, so her name would be Sarah, right? So the Yud, the Hey felt, got demoted over here. So why is no longer part of the name of this holy woman? So what did God do? He took the Hey and he used it later and added it to Joshua's name, right? Instead of being, his named Yoshua, right? What was his real name? Hosea. His real name was Hosea, as it says in Numbers chapter 13, verse 16. His real name was Hosea. They added the Hey for Yoshua. The Yud was added, so to speak. So in its original state, final letter was Sarai's name, right? The Yud did not have a vowel, right? There was no vowel over there when it comes at the end of a word, right? The end of a Hebrew word, right? So now the Yud, not the Hey, the Yud goes to Hosea to become Yoshua, right? So that's another possible answer why that is. So that's what I would say. I think those are two good explanations. Any other? Let me see here. See if there are any other questions here, or anyone have any questions or general questions? Again, I want to make clear that, any learning, especially Chumash. Chumash, I think in certain ways is more difficult. Certain ways I would say it's a little bit easier, right? The language I think is a little bit easier in general, but understanding what's going on is more difficult, right? Understanding what the context is, understanding why there's more severe punishment, less severe punishment, what the punishment is, what's going on, in general makes it more, I would say make it more difficult. But at the same time, I think the language, as opposed to other aspects of, either Hebrew literature or Talmudic literature, I think it's easy. I think the language itself is just easier. It's easier to understand. And I think, that's why, that's why it's called the written word, because, that's something wasn't necessarily passed down orally. Wasn't supposed to be passed down orally. Oral tradition is a lot more complicated, right? It's really a lot more complicated. So could be, again, possible explanation. Why did God make the Torah in an easier language? So people would remember. People need to remember what it said. They didn't necessarily understood what it means, right? That's why Moshe Rabbeinu, 39 years in the desert, was busy trying to explain to them what the entire Torah meant, right? If it's just the written law, okay, how long is it going to take to memorize? How many chains do you need to memorize? The written Torah, 5 books, a lot, right? But again, how I can understand it's not going to be forgotten. Not going to be forgotten so easily. So you get a whole bunch of people to memorize it. Very good. But it's not just about memorization here, right? It's about really understanding. So you can tell me, okay, I'll cut Moshe Rabbeinu and some others some slack. Maybe it'll take them 2 years to teach the entire Torah. In order for them to memorize it, pass it down. Maybe 2 years, 5 years. 5 years, okay, there are 3 million people. It might take a while. You want to tell me it's going to take 39 years? 39 years in order to teach the entire Torah. It's not going to take that long. So you can tell me they kept going over and over and over until they understood it like the back of their hand. Okay, maybe. It's still, I would say it's a long time. So what did he get him on Sinai besides the written law? The oral law. That's what he was explaining. It's a lot more complicated. Right? Not only is it a lot more complicated, that was supposed to be passed down orally. Problem was, because of the destruction of the temple, the rabbis are worried, right? The rabbis are worried totally worried that it's not going to be safe, not going to be able to be preserved. So what do? So they said you're allowed to write it. You're allowed to write it down, because if it would have been, so many different chains of people memorizing it, and then they got cut down, they got dispersed, so it would have been forgotten. So 100% they would have been forgotten. But really, it was supposed to be passed down orally. The written law, not. I think the written law is a lot easier, right? Though I think it's a lot easier to understand, because I think the wording is easier in different ways, right? Understanding what it means is a different thing, right? But the words themselves, not so complex, so to speak. There is a lot of meaning. I'm not saying not. I'm just saying the text, the text itself. Someone asks, person wants to buy a copy set of Talmud. Where do you buy it? Artscroll.com. Right, I'm gonna put it up here. 1 second. All right, the best translation is ArtScroll. They're not gonna be cheap, but you go to artscroll.com. That's where they have the best translation of Talmud. Yeah, most likely it's probably not on Amazon, but I would assume, a local bookstore should have it on hand. But whatever, you can order from ArtScroll. ArtScroll should a lot of volumes. Someone asks, how does the serpent know the words to say to Eve? The serpent's a whole discussion. It's a whole discussion. The serpent, we understand, was the evil inclination, the angel of death. Now the question is, how did the serpent speak? Right, that's really the question. Right, how did the serpent speak? So one explanation is the serpent, the Mr. S, as we're going to call him, was outside of the serpent, and somehow, I don't know, ventriloquist or whatever, was able to get the snake to speak. And first of all, the snake also had legs. Also, Talmud says was a great helper to man till he got chopped down, till his legs got cut off or whatever. But the question is, how does the serpent know? There are a lot of animals in the garden, right? Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, right? They see all these trees, they see all these animals, right? So how did the serpent know? So he knew like the other animals. They're in the same area, right? If they were in the same area, then it would make sense, because we have to remember that, Adam, whatever he called the animals, that was its name. So where the animals come from? It's not like he trapped them. They were there in paradise, doing whatever they were doing, right? Whatever God wanted them to do, that's what they were doing. So if it says there were animals there, I can also assume the snake is there, right? Snake's one of the animals, creepy crawly things, whatever you want to call it, right? Or not creepy crawly thing, amphibian, whatever it is, right? But it's also there, right? It's also part of, the what's the word? The atmosphere, the atmosphere in the Garden of Eden. You had trees, you had beautiful trees, you had food there. Man didn't have to do anything. The food was, brought before him, all these different things. So there were animals there also. And one of the things that was there was a snake, right? So that's how he got there. Where did he get the words? He got the words from Mr. S. That's where he got the words from. Mr. S used the snake, right? One explanation. He used the snake. To get to Eve, right? So I do have a video on Tanakh Talk, spoke about it. I think we call it like, what's the deal with the serpent, or what's the deal with the snake, or something like that. Whatever. I gave it a long time ago. I spoke about also on one of my Parsha videos as well. About that and free will. Probably spoke about free will as well. About that. But simple explanation is it came from Mr. S, right? The evil inclination, the angel of death, whatever you want to call it. Either you tell me he was outside the snake and he just made the snake speak, or he actually was the snake itself. That's who he was. He transformed himself into the snake, right? That could also be. There are different explanations, but in either case, that's probably what happened. Someone asked, is Faria okay? Yeah, I haven't seen too many problems with it. There are some things on there that I've seen a little bit, I don't know, as English would say, a little bit dodgy, right? But for the most part, it's good. I think, and again, my opinion, for what it's worth, I think it's better to have books. There are things you can buy with like all kinds of commentaries and super commentaries. You have thousands of books and whatever, and on a CD-ROM. I think that might be good for someone more advanced, but I think it's better with books, no question. Got it in front of you. You're not on an app. You don't have to worry about it on Shabbos, right? Carry a book wherever. To learn. I think it's better to have. There are good things. And other sites on. On Faria, there's a Talmudic site called eDaf. Right. If you Google eDaf, it's got every page of Talmud, on. So, also has classes on every single page of Talmud, in many different languages. Regardless, it's not the same as having the book in front of you. You can say, well, if I can't afford it, okay, it's a different issue, right? With the question of money. So, it's either you take one volume at a time. You do, because Art Scroll, let's say for one tract, they can have 3 different volumes, and each volume can be, I don't know, like $25 or more. So it does get expensive. A person's going to go that route. You're not going to buy the entire thing, cost you like $500 or more, right? It's just it's a huge, it's a huge set. But I would say if a person's going to do it, you're going to start tractate by tractate or something like that, or buy one tractate, one thing. But I definitely think it's better to have books in front of you, than to use an app or do it online. I'm not saying you can't, right? Definitely saves money, there's no question, right? And the translation, I think on Faria is not so bad. I've used it a few times, right? I didn't find any too many issues with it. I found there's some books on there that probably not not so good, that shouldn't be there, but on the up and up it is, right? And translations are not bad, right? I definitely don't think they're bad, but again, I think it's better to have books than apps or being on the computer or whatever. Certainly for Shabbos, I don't think there's any question. But if it's a cost, if it's about cost or whatever, then yeah, using it online. There are many different sites person could use online. There are many good sites out there. I'm not saying not. Definitely not saying no. There is what to be said that to having books in the house. Doesn't Hebrew, English, whatever. I mean, I have a whole bunch of books in in English, probably more than 500 English books. Either on Jewish law, philosophy, other things. So, books are good. Definitely books are good, and they're good to have as references. Also, if you're talking specifically about this, okay. A person, if it's a cost issue, yeah, then I would say, use it online. You could use it online. If it's not such a cost issue, I would tell you to buy it. It's easier, right? Just easier to have in front of you. You don't have a Shabbos issue or festival issue. You're right. I just mentioned you can't read it on Shabbos, right? 100%. Yeah, someone here mentions. So somebody mentioned about Tam V'das. Tam V'das, my Rebbe's book that he wrote, this book on Chumash many years ago when he was still in, I think he was still in Johannesburg. I think it came out like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And they have a translation. It's called Taste and Know. That's a literal translation. I mean, so actually I think I do have it in English. As well. It's not, the whole thing's not translated. I think some of it is, but not every single thing is translated. And the translation's not bad. It's not a bad translation, but I did rub it in a little bit. I said, you couldn't find a better translation, a better, more colloquial translation than taste and know. I mean, okay, that's literally what it means. Tam means taste, to taste something. Das means knowledge, right? So they translate it literally. He's like, so what's the matter with the translation? He didn't have a problem with the translation. It doesn't flow. I'm not saying the translation itself is bad, right? I didn't go through the whole thing. I went through different parts of it. It's very good. Translation's very good, but I could have, maybe it should have been a better title, but it is out there. Someone here points out, very good. And as the person here points out, 100% can't be read on Shabbos, right? Art Scroll, again, where can it be found in general? Either go to artscroll.com, or if you live in a place that has a Judaica store, they should have it there, right? They should definitely have it there. You can compare prices also. If a person lives, let's say, a couple hours away from a store and they'll ship it, see what the difference in price from them and from ArtScroll, right? You can get it from them, or you get it from the, from the supplier itself, which is ArtScroll itself, artscroll.com. They're not, like I said, they're not going to be cheap. The volumes are not going to be cheap. But again, it's certainly better than Sonsino. No one has Sonsino today. I met one person that has a whole Talmudic set of Sonsino, and the translation is hard. It's worse than hard. I think the Aramaic is better. It's so much easier to read the Aramaic than read the English. The English is horrific. Art Scroll came out with a better translation. Even Steinsaltz came out with a better translation. I wouldn't necessarily, if you're gonna get a Talmud, I wouldn't bother with Steinsaltz. Just start with Art Scroll. Steinsaltz has different problems, right? Different issues. I don't really want to get into whatever different issues, right? But Art Scroll is better. Art Scroll is definitely better. Gives more background. You got footnotes there, whatever. But it's you're not going to learn how to learn from it. It's very hard to learn from it how to learn, because it's not a direct translation. It's more of a translation that flows, right? So you have to understand the root of the words and the etymology and other things, and then understand really what's going on. It's a whole different thing. But if a person is getting their feet wet, so I had to learn with a dictionary. It was before Art Scroll, right? If anyone can imagine. So I had a Jastrow dictionary. Some say he was an unbelievable heretic as well, but nonetheless, it was a good book for, just defining terms and roots of words and different things. But it was before Art Scroll, so it was a lot more difficult to translate. Art Scroll makes it very easy, right? Very, very easy. I'm not saying a person shouldn't necessarily use it. Depends what you're using it for, but it's definitely better than Sonsino. Definitely better than I would say it's definitely better than Steinsaltz. And that if a person's gonna buy a set of Talmud or any tractates, that's where they should buy it from. They should definitely start with with that. But again, they made it a lot easier, a lot easier. But again, the only way a person's really gonna learn is not to be spoon fed. You have to work hard. That's what it is. It's you just that's the way it is. I don't have any other way to put it. It's best to start with the Talmud or Mishnah. I would say better get your feet wet. Start with Mishnah than Talmud. But again, I would wait even till after conversion. I wouldn't be delving into this stuff till after conversion. But if a person is going to start to learn, you start with Mishnah. That's certainly how I started, and that's how most people. That's how kids start, right? Kids start fourth grade already. They start learning. They start learning Mishnah easier. Easier Mishnah than more difficult ones, and that's how they get acquainted. With Talmud, and now in fifth grade they already start learning. Basics and in Talmud, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. And then they go on to yeshiva. They learn more in depth and whatever. So that's really after conversion. Definitely after conversion. Any non-Jew should not be partaking in that until afterwards. Art Scroll definitely has Mishnah as well. That Mishnah for kids, that's right. They have picture books, for Shabbos and for other things. Make it real graphic, so you can be able to see what it's talking about. But again, you have to, you don't run before you don't walk before you learn how to crawl, and you don't run before you learn how to walk, right? So you got to get the basics in Jewish law. You got to get that down, go through the conversion, then, you start after that. Like I know someone now who's whatever, had a conversion, has to go through another conversion, whatever, and is learning in yeshiva here, and they don't teach him anything, teaching him Hebrew, that's about it. Not teaching him anything until after he has a proper conversion, right? No Talmud, no Mishnah, no nothing, right? Maybe Chumash he's learning, okay, but everything else, oral law is off limits. It's really off limits till after conversion. Yeah. Any other questions? Or any general questions? All right, so no other questions. Then I'm going to sign out in about an hour and 20 minutes. I'm gonna do Tanakh talk. I'm gonna do it on Sundays now, and I'm gonna speak about mental health and Jewish law. And if someone does something because they're depressed, are they liable? They're not liable. So I'm gonna talk about different things like that. So I do this every Sunday, 9:00 Eastern time, 4:00 Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook. I am back on Facebook now. My new Facebook page at Michael Chaim Kaufman, my English name, my Hebrew name, so I don't get boxed out again. Hopefully, still working on getting my other things set up, or you can send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, REBBICHAIMCOFFMAN at gmail.com. Anyone who hasn't sent me a friend request, I'm sort of going to limit what I do because they sort of shut me down because they thought I was spamming people. So I'm going to do it sporadically here and there. I find other people, whatever, but anyone who doesn't have a connection wants to find me on Facebook. So that's my new Facebook page at Michael Chaim Kaufman. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out.